Hey guys, I am gonna teach you how to get Monster Hunter Wilds into a playable state, even on the lowest settings possible, because I have the bare minimum requirements, kind of, actually a little bit more in some parts, but a little lower on some other parts, to play this game. Monster Hunter Wilds requirements for the beta are absolutely insane, but I have managed to get it look and play decently. It took a lot of tinkering, and the reason that you can see right there my task manager is because if you want to get your game to run decently, you're going to have to keep looking at it and make some decisions based on it. I am going to follow you along the entire part of this so you can figure it out. It will change depending on your hardware. So let's start the game and let's hope I don't have to compile the stupid shaders anymore. Very well, one thing that is very important for you to remember, people, is that you are not going to get 60 FPS out of this. Not even consoles can get 60 FPS out of this game, and they designed and optimized this game for consoles. So your goal is gonna be to get 30 FPS as stable as possible with the game looking as the least awful possible. And this is my problem with this game as a whole, is that it looks legitimately, guys, a lot of this game looks legitimately worse than Monster Hunter 3 for the freaking Wii because of how poorly optimized it is. As you can see, I am running a GeForce 1660 Super right there. If you take a look at the minimum requirements, that's exactly the bare minimum you're supposed to have to run this game. And you can see right there, I am not maxed out and I am still capped at 30 FPS. I sometimes drop even below it actually. And the reason is not because I am maxed out. You can see the graphs right there. My GPU is barely running at half capacity. My CPU is barely running at 30% capacity, something like that. I could get a lot more performance out of my GPU and out of my CPU, but the bottleneck is actually my RAM. Not even my RAM, my VRAM. The 1660 Super has 6 gigs of DDR5 VRAM, which for any other game that you can imagine, even Cyberpunk 2077, you are almost never gonna max out the VRAM. And this game maxes it out as soon as you boot up. And that is gonna be tip number 1 to optimize this game. You gotta make sure in Windows settings that shared GPU memory usage is actually enabled. If you got your drivers up to date, in most versions of Windows is enabled by default. You are gonna need at least 6 gigabytes to set aside for extra VRAM, and that's going to be drawn from your normal RAM. As you can see right there, I am very close to maxing out already. This is one of the few cases where closing out all the other windows that you have open matters. For example, the Steam window, I'm not going to pull it up because I'm going to dox myself, but the Steam window that you gotta open to run this game, it has pictures in it, it has like icons in it, and it is like 150 megabytes out of RAM. See, I'm going to close it right now. Close as many windows as possible because this game will need as much RAM as you can get. If you got like 32 gigabytes of RAM, and that's something I am considering, is getting 16 gigs more worth of RAM, and I think a lot of my bottlenecks are gonna be gone. Now, having that aside, you have 3 possible bottlenecks in this game. You can either be capped on the RAM like I am, you can be capped on the CPU, or you can be capped on the GPU. This is a unique game in the sense that everybody is having different problems trying to run it. Now, the way I fixed the RAM issue that I have and most people are gonna have, because most gaming computers have 16 gigs of RAM, we are going to go right here. What are things that are loaded up by the RAM? Well, basically, texture quality. The textures get loaded into the VRAM, and I suspect a big part of this problem is that there is a lot of textures that don't need loading. You can see right there, it needs 6.21 gigabytes of VRAM, and I do not even have 6 gigabytes of VRAM in my entire card. That's assuming I got nothing else running. And it's a shame because texture quality is one of the best ways to make a game look good. Okay, zoom into my player. I look like a PS2 character right now. It sucks. Now, thankfully, even on a low-end graphics card like mine, I am not capped on the power yet. I can get more power out of this thing. Ignore the thermals for a little bit. I know it's at 72 degrees. The problem is that it's like 40 degrees in here today. It's summer in Argentina. It's awful. I could turn on my AC and probably drop like 10 degrees out of this thing. But we can squeeze some more performance out of our GPU. And if that's the case, the best way to get this game to look a little better, if we go to the options, we can increase the texture quality. You're gonna have to fiddle with this yourself because every computer is different, but this is done by your GPU, and if we increase this filtering, it will increase the way the textures look. Is it gonna be a one-to-one translation to make it look like a texture is actually high quality? No, but is the closest we can do to imitate it. And if you take a look at my task manager, the impact to my performance has been minimal so far. But you can see, let's do a quick comparison here. Well, actually, if you look at that, the high filtering is actually performing better. I got less lag now. Huh. Well, that's a win for us. Look at that. The game is gonna lack detail, but it's gonna look a lot less pixelated, because I tell you, in some computers, this game is running like a PlayStation 1 game. You remember the Silent Hill? I'm gonna throw like a screenshot here. This is how the game looked for me before I optimized it. It's crazy. And as you can see right there, my demand for the graphics card has gone up. I am now at 52%. And the only reason I am not cranking it more is because it's actually summer and my cooling setup is not very good. And I don't want to heat it up to 90 degrees just to play this game. If the fans spin up and it goes boom boom, it's going to be really annoying. But yes, that's one thing that you can do right now to make the game look a lot nicer that shouldn't have, even if you got a weak graphics card, it shouldn't have a huge impact into your performance. Now the mesh quality, this is the quality of the hair. Can I zoom into some guy's character to see how it looks? Like this guy. This is not the nicest hair out there. Personally, I do not recommend pushing this mesh thing up a lot if you're trying to get as much graphics quality as possible into the game. In the middle of a boss fight, you're barely gonna see hair and other types of mesh going around. Now, one thing that you can get the quality up right now is the fur quality. And I guess I should probably go out and show you the world. There is still gonna be lag spikes, okay? Even on high-end computer, there are some lag spikes into this game. You are gonna have to deal with it. That's one of the optimization problems that I think will get fixed, especially in some boss fights. You can drop down a lot of your FPS, but that's just a matter of there are some things that particular boss is doing that's messing everything up. Now, the fur quality will turn this thing from a PlayStation 1 game into something that kinda looks like a monster, okay? Let me show you the problem here. This is the highest level boss you can fight in this game. By the way, I tried killing it. It was really hard. He has like some sort of thunder ability that lags the hell out of my computer, but on low fur quality, he looks like a freaking PlayStation 1. You play Dino Crisis on the PlayStation 1, it looks like that, even though it doesn't have any fur, which is weird. But yes, we're gonna up the fur quality on this guy. You can disable it to get a couple more performance. It will be impactful, but honestly, bang for your buck, it looks a lot nicer the game when you up it. So we're gonna leave it up. And mind you, I started the fight, I am not even looking at the boss and my FPS are already dropping. He's doing like some ability that really lags my PC. I had a bunch of people telling me the same problem. Little pro tip, if you wanna fight a boss that lags you, you probably wanna do it here away from grass. Grass is a huge problem from this game. I think this game would benefit a lot in optimization if I could disable it. If I could just get rid of all the blades of grass in the game, this game would get like 10 more FPS. If Capcom actually cares about fixing this game for PC, that's one thing that I would love to see. Just not low quality grass, disabling all the unnecessary grass in the game. I know it sucks, but that's something that would help a lot for low-end PCs. Of course, I got grass quality to the lowest, and if you wanna get this thing to a playable state, you gotta put it on the lowest. The sky and the cloud quality, you can put it on the super high and you're not gonna notice a difference until you get the thunderstorm. It happens like every so often. If you get a thunderstorm and you get high cloud quality, which is when you fight the last boss, actually, the game is gonna freeze on you. I've seen people games crash over those thunders. The thunders are causing all the freaking lag on that boss. So you gotta keep it low just for that. It just changes like the little image that you see, the stars and stuff. It doesn't really even matter, so you can ignore it. Now, frame generation, Nvidia themselves said that frame generation is not for low FPS consoles, okay? Frame generation was made for when you got like a super high-end monitor and you wanna make it from 90 FPS to 120. That's what this is made for. Generating extra frames from 30 FPS to 60, it doesn't work. It's super pixelated. It actually breaks. It doesn't have like native whatever this is supposed to be. I got an old graphics card. So when they said this thing can run on 60 FPS with frame generation, they were, in my opinion, straight up lying. Because yes, you're gonna hit 60 FPS, I will hit them right now if I enable it, but they are garbage frames and they do not make the game feel any smoother at all. However, I will say that the upscaling is actually not that bad. And that's one of the things of this game, okay? This is how the game actually supposed to look. They render it at 720p, a very garbage 720p where there's a bunch of weird pixels. I don't know why this engine works like this. And you actually upscale the game to look into something normal. If I were to put it on actual 1080p, because you can do it in here if you put 100, if you put render scaling at 100, you're gonna get your actual resolution. It doesn't look very good, and as you can see right there, my game is already dying. So I am gonna be honest with you, upscaling is actually not a bad feature. So we are gonna use upscaling. We have to. Now, if you got a modern graphics card, you can use DLSS. I do not have DLSS on my graphics card. I do not recommend Intel unless you got Arc, one of the new Intel GPUs. I am gonna use the AMD one, even though I got an NVIDIA graphics card. Now, the upscaling mode, there is two shaders here, upscaling sharpness and upscaling mode. Once again, my main constraint is the VRAM, but we're gonna see here what changes if I improve the upscaling here. Let's change, for example, to quality here. I'm holding 30 FPS on the quality mode, but as you can see, there is really no improvement into the graphics. You can play with it, but I recommend you go for performance or balanced. It doesn't really matter. I would say balanced is probably the nicest you can go before you stop noticing improvements. The upscaling is not perfect. All these dots that you see here, for example, this gradient, that's the upscaling algorithm in your graphics card having a hard time telling the difference. But if you look at here, there is an increase in the demand of my GPU, okay? This is drawing like 5% more power out of my GPU to upscale. So if you're GPU bottlenecked, you probably want to put this down to performance mode. Now, upscaling sharpness, this is very interesting here. I left it on 50 here, but we can play with it a little more. Let's try, for example, 70. Do we see any noticeable difference here? I would say no, and I would say that there is no significant impact to my performance either. Let's try to get some movement here. When you change a graphics setting, you always want to move a little because there is a lot of effects that do not actually kick in until you start moving. But yeah, I'm still like nowhere near cap here. Let's actually crank it up to the maximum here. Well, this is actually kind of funny. It breaks when you crank it up to the maximum. It is more pixelated than before. Yeah, I will leave it back on 50 here. It's the recommended setting. It seems like it works the best. Now, these are some things that I choose not to enable high, even though I got the wiggle room to do. This is for people that got CPU issues. If your CPU, you're seeing your task manager right here on performance. If your CPU is going close to 100%, these are the settings that you want to really lower here. You want to lower grass tree sway. This is CPU things. Wind simulation, you gotta lower this. Water effects, for some reason it draws a lot of CPU power. Distant shadow quality, not quality. Distant shadow quality, if you move this around to low, you actually free up a bunch of your CPU. Contact shadows, also a big problem for CPU. And the ambient occlusion, I got an NVIDIA graphics card. I got several people tell me different things because I got a friend with an AMD graphics card. In my case, ambient occlusion actually messed up my performance on my GPU. It kept drawing like 5% more power out of my GPU. It doesn't mean it will happen to you. Once again, for AMD people, this is not a problem. So if you can enable it, it's all shadow quality here. There's like 20 different settings for shadows. Now I gotta move my camera, I guess, here. Screen space reflection. This is all GPU. They really gotta do something about these thunders. I don't know how to fix that. Sadly, there is no settings to disable the detail on thunders. It's actually maxing out my GPU too. Like the thunders are maxing out my GPU, which was like at half capacity the whole time. Now it's actually maxing out. And as you can see, there is still a bunch of texture issues that I think is because of my VRAM. But if you look at these monsters, they legitimately have no textures. That's just flat colors. Look at this. This gray blob is the mob. Sometimes it loads properly, sometimes it doesn't. I don't know why, and it's always the stupid thunders that mess everything up. Now, volumetric fog. Very important that you disable this one. Volumetric fog is for when you go to the desert. The little sand particles, they were lagging the hell out of my computer. The very first tutorial that you see is in the desert, actually, and you see these sand particles flying everywhere. They destroy my GPU. So we're gonna put this on low. Depth of field is one that you can enable. It will draw a little more power on your GPU. Once again, you gotta look at your task manager at all times and see if you're capping or not. But if you got the GPU power to spare, depth of field is gonna make it a little nicer looking on the daytime. Now, a couple ones that you wanna disable no matter what. Motion blur, it freaking sucks. We're gonna disable motion blur right here. It freaking sucks. It doesn't do anything, it just causes lag and it makes the game look crappier. Bloom, we're gonna disable for similar reasons. Now we're gonna go to display here because that's also part of the graphics settings. Enabling VSync, for whatever reason, it increases the draw of my GPU by a lot. Unless you have some sort of frame rate issue, like your monitor is bugging out or whatever, I would disable VSync on NVIDIA. As far as I could tell, on AMD is not a problem, but if you got an NVIDIA graphics card and you're not having any issues without VSync, keep it disabled. We are gonna cap the frame rate. You may be wondering, why would you cap the frame rate? To get 10 more frames per second in the town where you don't really need the extra frames, you're taking up a bunch more VRAM and CPU power, and the game has a really hard time actually freeing it up for when it actually needs it to actually keep a steady 30 frames in a fight, for example. We are basically just trying to even it out for when the spikes come in. Also, personally, I think going from 30 FPS to 20 FPS on a lag spike is a lot less noticeable than going from 40 to 20, but that's just my personal vision of that. But yes, this is how I got my game to be playable. Does it look good? No, it still looks like a freaking PS2 game. That is Capcom's fault. This engine is absolute garbage, and until they do some serious changes to the code, this is gonna be a huge problem. But you can get a decent boss fighting experience, except for the last boss of the beta, because the freaking thunders, man. You can actually get a more or less stable 30 FPS experience. And before you think that that's not good enough, let me tell you that consoles are also running on 30 FPS. So let's be realistic here. If you wanna get a better graphical performance than a console, you're gonna need a very high-end PC. This is not for the high-end PC users. The main takeaway that you gotta make out of this entire debacle is that when you look at the settings, you actually gotta look at your task manager right here. You gotta see if your VRAM, that's the dedicated GPU memory usage, your total RAM, that's memory right here, your CPU or your GPU are maxing out. I showed you all the sliders and what they take, what power they draw from. You're gonna have to make a conscious decision depending on your system to seeing, okay, my GPU is at 100% of the time, I gotta lower the upscaling sharpness. My CPU is maxing out, for example, well, in that case, we gotta disable tree sway, we gotta disable wind simulation, that is all CPU based. And if you're like me, your memory is getting maxed out, the best thing I can tell you is lower the texture quality to hell and increase the filtering settings, because the filtering settings is also gonna draw from your GPU, but in my case, I got a low-end GPU here. I am not maxing all the power out of the GPU, I am maxing out the freaking memory of the GPU. So having a smaller texture and more pixelated texture is gonna take up less memory, and filtering it is gonna take more GPU power, more GPU processing power, but it's not gonna take more memory, so that's what I'm gonna do. One thing that pisses me off about this engine is that even in cases where I am not entirely maxed out, I cannot get that many more than 40 FPS out of this game. No matter what I do, if I make it look full PlayStation 1 mode, I still cannot get 40 FPS, and I am very concerned about developers using the new upscaling, which is actually good technology, okay? For all that we're saying about it, it actually looks pretty nice, all things considered. But having developers rely on upscaling to make their game functional, this is just ridiculous, people. You cannot say that your game can run on 60 FPS because you got frame generation. That's just lying. NVIDIA themselves said that this is not what frame generation is for. And all for what? This game still looks terrible. I can play it, I can tell what's going on. A 2010 Assassin's Creed would look better than this, guys. That's all I'm gonna say on the matter. And I record my videos on 30 FPS anyway because the hard drive space and my connection. So this game will look deceptively watchable to you in the video. I am very disappointed in Capcom. This is not great. But you can still play it and the game is still good, okay? The only reason I went so far to optimize the game and take a look at all the settings is because I actually have fun playing this game. So I really do hope that by the time February comes in and they do the full release, they actually take a really deep look into optimizing this game and making it function like a game of this graphic crappiness should actually function. I hope you guys can take advantage of these tricks to get a little more FPS out of the game. If you found out another setting that I didn't mention actually helps you with performance, please tell me in the comments. I will pin whoever gets like a good idea here. I'm gonna try them out if you keep figuring out. The beta just came out. I think we can still figure out a couple more things to get a couple more FPS out of this game. Subscribe, join the Discord, and thank you for watching.